Up it again.
Welcome
Take two.
Welcome to Beers and Ideas. Today we're going to have a look at 3 different philosophical ideas and link them both to the social work. We're going to do a marathon because it was Manchester Marathon over the weekend, so we're going to do that tonight. So, without further ado, let's introduce our beers. So, George, what beer have you got tonight?
I've got Saint Etienne 0% from Aldi.
Was that made by
non-alcoholic beer?
Was it made by a real saint?
Yes, it was. And it's Saint spelled a different way than normal. Sainte.
Wow, with an extra E. The saint who's been on the E's, but not on the alcohol.
And the I's the wrong way around, isn't it?
You're looking at it, not us. And is there any link between Saint Etienne and the local area, George?
Not that I can immediately make up my mind right in this present, but someone might come to us.
George, people be watching this thinking that we make this stuff up. We can't have such lies being filtered through. Okay, thank you, George. And Stephen, would you?
Well, interestingly, mine is a Ghost Dance, a Chinook Pale Ale.
Wow, Chinook.
Yeah.
Is that from a Native American tribe?
Indeed, made and shipped to me directly by Chinooks. I thought they were helicopters, though. What's going on here? Have the Native Americans misappropriated the name of the helicopter, or was it the other way around?
Oh, have they been building helicopters? And the whole myth that we've been sold that you know the Native American population is being kind of devastated by Western culture is a myth.
Absolutely. They're selling arms to people.
We're all being sold a myth. And is there a link to the local area?
No. Other than the Chinooks of Shields, of course. You remember the Chinooks of Shields? You know what I mean? The famous satellite tribe that formed and came over to this country rather than us going over to their country in America. They came here and populated. They had a little encampment next to Gypsy Green Stadium. They had a little encampment down there. Sadly now no longer there. But you know, because of the redevelopment of the seafront. But you know, these things happen. And we have to move on. I do have 2 beers with me. That's sufficient for the 3 shows that we're going to record tonight. Because I'm not going to have 3, but I'm going to start with my Ghost Dance Chinook Pale Ale. What have you got, Jamie? What have you got?
Brewdog. Which was actually made by dogs.
Right.
They get the hops and they're patted down with a paws. Like that. And that's because it's quite a unique flavour. It's very nice. And this edition is called Hazy Jane.
Nice. I'm now a shareholder.
Hazy Jane is was my first girlfriend. And she left us and she was so devastated because she made such a mistake in her life. She went on to start brewing beer with dogs.
Right. Patting it down with their little paws. That's amazing. Yeah. Unbelievable.
True story.
You know how we were talking about before we pressed record. We were talking about whether we should make this now just an audio podcast or an audio and video one. Well, we need to make it. This one needs to be video just so people can see all 3 of us going. Oh dear me. Well, that's excellent.
This is academic gold. This like.
No wonder nobody listens.
So your second beer, are we going to mention anything about your second beer?
No, I'll mention that maybe in the 2nd or 3rd episode that we're recording tonight in this marathon of beers and ideas episode recording.
You've only got 2 beers to last you for 3 recordings.
Oh man, because I'll start saying things that I wish I hadn't said if I drink 3. Because I mean, it's a 5% of this one, and the other one's a 6%er.
This is 5%.
I know exactly, George. The ours is a 0% of there, so we're going to be relying on you by the 3rd one.
Yeah.
Okay, so because I've got 4 cans, so I think I better start now. Otherwise, it's going to be some heavy editing or some
This
of the
could get messy. This could get messy.
rubbish I'm going to talk about. So let's. Pardon me. It's a bit of wind. Okay. So today, for number 1 or number 2 or number 3, I put that in so you could edit it whichever way you want, Stephen.
Thanks, Jamie. Helpful.
For number 1, for number 2, for number 3. So I'm going to talk about Karl Popper. Karl Popper, a little introduction, Australian philosopher, should I say, famous for a number of his kind of thoughts and some of his writings. Extremely fascinating man, because he was around when there was that huge, how should I say, political divide between the hard right and the hard left. So had the Nazi Germany on the hard right and the hard left with Stalinist Russia, and he was kind of sandwiched in between the two in Austria at the time. So initially started off being a socialist, and his earlier writings kind of focused in that direction. Fascinating life history that he had, and then that was a direct pushback against Nazi Germany, who had overtaken the area. And then he recognised that there was a bit of a problem with the socialist cause, because he was talking to people in the Socialist Party who were killing people, killing Nazis and killing other people, but justifying everything that we're doing down to socialism. So there was the thinking had stopped, was because not this was socialism, this is what we do, and that really kind of bothered him, and that's why he left socialism behind because of that. He says it was too closed in thinking, and he felt that socialism was too dogmatic. And wouldn't accept other thoughts into it, and it didn't grow, it didn't develop, it remained fixed, and he felt his mind couldn't expand as a result of that. So I'll go on to his later things, but I'm going to have a bit more. That's Karl Popper. Lived in New Zealand, lived in the UK, I believe, for some time, and he had great friends with Albert Einstein, coincidentally enough, and knew Freud, I believe. But his link with South Shields was, not South Shields, the Northeast. We should welcome the whole area. He's actually George Bull's great grandfather.
Get away.
Right? Yeah. Do you know that, George? And in the 90s, when we used to go out raving and the big fish, little fish, and people used to sniff poppers, he actually invented that. So that's a fact for you. Okay.
Did you used to sniff poppers? I think you were doing it wrong. I think you were doing it wrong if you were doing that, weren't you?
Well, yeah, you inhaled it, didn't you? Inhaled poppers.
Did you?
Yeah.
I don't know. By the 90s, I was married and I was listening to Frank Sinatra on my gramophone. You know what I mean? By the 90s, you know.
Yeah, you breathed it in. I remember people used to breathe in the lips used to turn blue.
Right. I thought poppers were them little things you put on your tongue.
That's acid.
Ah.
LSD.
You pop acid, but you pop the
bottle. You're both very knowledgeable about this kind of thing. It's an interesting diversion. This is an interesting diversion. Take us back to radiators, Jamie.
Yeah, and obviously Karl Popper, like many philosophers before him, had a great influence on radiators. He actually invented underfloor heating, and it was often said that the Romans did that, but that's a lie. It was Karl Popper.
Get away.
Okay. He did actually live on the same streets, but didn't know Wittgenstein did the radiator in Vienna.
Yeah.
Right.
He was upper middle class, in the Wittgensteins were like super rich, but like sort of very, very close.
So, thank you, George. So, on a serious note now. So, what? So that little story I said about the his tussle with socialism because as a result of left-wing ideology led him to kind of really challenge what he called pseudosciences. So he was well aware, because he was sitting around at the same time as Freud, and he was well aware that and challenged his thinking. Where he would say, Freud would say that if something happened in somebody's life, he would look for a reason for it, and it wasn't kind of based on science. It was based on what had gone before. So you see, what had gone before must obviously fit what's going to happen next, like a cause and effect. But it never looked to disprove itself. It always looked to prove itself, that there's a difference there. So he says science looks to disprove itself. Pseudoscience, what he called at the time, looked to prove itself. So if something happened, it would look to justify its position, very much like socialism. This has happened, and then socialism would kind of justify that action, and that's what he was critical of. And there was a famous time when Albert Einstein had looked to prove his theory of general relativity. I think it was 1980. I can't remember the date now, and it's passed us by. So what he did, he because of general relativity, he believed that a gravitational force can bend light, which kind of disputed what Newton would say. And the only way to kind of prove that from an observational point of view on Earth would be to see if when a solar eclipse happened, the stars would move in different places, because the light of the stars had been bent by the movement of the sun. Yeah. And the only type to see that is a solar eclipse. So Einstein set all his theories out and says that, look, if this is wrong, my theory is wrong. So he went out, and there was scientists all around the world looking to take the measurement to see if Einstein's theories was right, of general relativity, and he was quite prepared to accept that if it didn't work out, his theory was wrong. So he set out to say, I'm setting out to disprove my own theory here. And his theory was right, as we all know it was. So, and the stars did move because the light moved because of gravitational force. So that's what he did. So how does that apply to social work is a big key. And I know people are scratching their heads here, but
yes. Can you only do care plans on a solar eclipse?
He's got it. Did you watch the video? Did you read his book?
Great.
No, because how it relates to social, I think it relates really, really well, is because what he was saying, and I think maybe he's been a bit overly critical to Freud, was that you can look to justify your actions in any way you can. You can always find a reason for something to happen and justify it to fit your own theory or your own train of thoughts at that moment in time. What he was saying is that just doesn't wash. He says you need sound evidence to challenge something, and he needs to kind of push it against. So what he was saying, and how this relates to social work, is that a dogmatic approach is saying, no, I'm right. So if you work with somebody, you're thinking, oh, well, because that person's upbringing, they're not going to be a good parent. So you're kind of looking to prove that all the time. There's no evidence in there. You're looking backwards rather than forwards. So what he was saying is where's your evidence? Don't be dogmatic and trying to look for evidence of what you think is going to happen. Is you need to find evidence of what's the evidence actually telling you. So that's what you need to do, is stop being dogmatic in your approach and be open-minded to change. That's why he ended his view. That's why he was critical of socialism in the end, was because he felt it was dogmatic in its approach. Always look to justify its own existence. And it's the same in social. We can't just justify what we do because we've got initial hunch and we're kind of backing that up. We need to find evidence, and we not be dogmatic about how we approach problems. We need to look at what is the evidence telling us, not what we think is happening there. So,
I was drawn to thinking about mental capacity act stuff when you were saying that, about how people go in with an assumption that people lack capacity to answer a particular question, don't they? So they go in with that. So they start looking for what they need to justify that person lacks capacity, rather than starting with a clean slate, so to speak, and going in and thinking, I'll go and find out. I'll do the supported decision making. I'll do the supported decision making, and I'll try and help them make this decision for themselves. And that will either provide me with the evidence that they can make the decision or that they can't. But I have to do that bit first. But even though the Act says, doesn't it, or the guidance says, you can't use a diagnosis like dementia or whatever, or the label of learning disability to make a decision on capacity. I sense that maybe maybe in the heat of practice when people are really busy, maybe it is a shortcut to kind of getting the ball rolling and getting to decisions and getting things moving through the system or whatever.
And you know yourself, Stephen, there's times when you're thinking, I really want the outcome of this assessment to be that the person lacks or the person has for whatever reason, because the risks are so great here. I think if the lack of person, this is the best decision I might make, blah blah blah. So, and you see that in all professionals, especially in social care professionals and medical professionals, is that often the outcome of the assessment is kind of what suits the potential care plan, and that's for. Often for paternalistic reasons. I'm not saying for 1 minute anyone's doing for any kind of other reason than what they think is best for the person. But this kind of stops that happening, doesn't it? So it's like, if you want that course of action to happen, it's very hard not to skew your questions or interpret your answers in certain ways.
Well, even not consciously, even not consciously, you may not even do it consciously. Do you know what I mean? But you may just have a routine set of questions or a routine approach that you utilize when you're in a particular situation, because you know that gets you to a particular, it gets you to a solution, whatever it is. So you use that method, you use those sets of questions, but those aren't subtle enough and nuanced to the particular individual, are they? So yeah, are there parallels in children's work, George, there than with that kind of thing?
Well, I think Jamie's sort of hit the nail on the head. I think it is a useful mode of operating. I think with children's social care, are the parents have the parents? Well, it's the treatment of the child, isn't it? Is it harmful? Is it significantly harmful, or is it positive? I mean, one criticism would be it's not like the son example. It's right or wrong. It is a subjective statement. This is a good parent, a bad parent. The villains, the real villains, are so few and far between. You might have a full social work career, never come across a murderous parent, or the ones that we'll learn about. The people in the middle, the vast majority of anyone's caseload, the level of subjectivity is going to be vast. So a different social worker on a different day, I would suggest equally applying Popper's principles could come up with a different result. But I think the guiding point that Jamie's making, and correct us if I'm wrong, my initial hypothesis is these parents are harmful to the child. However, I'll welcome all information after that point, good or bad, and weigh it equally up. I'm not going to be
dogmatic in your approach.
Just switch off the positive radio waves, say, oh, they don't count. I'll be like, oh, brilliant, she did that, excellent. I was really surprised in that home visit, rather than, hey, God, you've seen them again, and blah, 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 blah. Because and that way of thinking is very difficult to get out of, isn't it? So that's why you've got to maintain that scientific viewpoint, isn't it? That rigorous sort of mindset, which is hard.
You can link that to labeling theory, can't you? Is that you can directly make some connections. So it kind of Popper's theory kind of gets you away from that labeling, which is very hard to do, especially what we mentioned before when we work with people who time and time again have come up with the same results. It's how do you see past that and remain open-minded, not dogmatic in the approach. And I think reminding ourselves of some of Karl Popper's thoughts is really useful. And I think the interesting thing about Karl Popper is now it seems common sense, isn't it? It seems common sense that that's the approach we take. We question what he would call pseudoscience, and we'll base our decisions based on facts. But that wasn't the common way of thinking when he came up with it. It's been so widely accepted. It's become part of our normal, with thoughts on how we approach these issues. But I think there's a danger is because there was a need for him to actually say that. At one point, especially when you had the rise of the far right and the rise of the far left, and it was a case of you stick into these ideologies so importantly, it kind of nearly destroyed the earth. So we need to kind of just remember that it was wrote for a reason. is a bit of a warning, and I think we need to kind of keep on addressing that and making sure that we're not dogmatic approaches. I sometimes think it's quite easy on a wider scale. It's quite easy for to be quite dogmatic towards left wing ideologies. I think the majority of social workers, myself included, are left wing thinkers, but it's kind of not getting pulled into what does socialism say that we should be thinking. It's a case of no, we are left wing thinkers, but we're not stuck to an ideology. We're looking at how can we support people, generally speaking.
I'm interested in this pseudoscience idea because one of the things that social workers will say once they've been in practice for some time is, we never use theory anymore. That's one thing you hear. What's the point in being taught theory at university? Because now I'm in practice, I never use theory anymore. And my answer to that question is always, well, you do. You've just kind of absorbed it. But also, when you think of things like, the underpinning principles of the Mental Capacity Act or the Care Act, even, or you think of signs of safety and those kind of things, they're underpinned, aren't they, by theoretical research-based ideas and concepts. So I suppose social workers do use theory. They just don't badge it as theory because it's been turned into some sort of model or some sort of approach or some sort of legislation. But is there not a risk there then in practice that the social workers who were using those ideas don't understand the theoretical perspectives that those ideas have come from? Therefore, you see where I'm going with this in terms of pseudoscience. Therefore, they're not using it in full knowledge of how it's been informed. They're just using it as a slavish process way of operating, which means it's kind of almost a dumbed down kind of idea, which runs the risk of, well, we apply it like this, but what if it doesn't work for this person and that person? We've got nowhere to peel the layers back to think, right, well, how can I rebuild this approach for this family or this older person or this person with a learning disability? We do it this way. This is how we do it. And really the point would be to peel it back and think, well, the theory told us these sorts of things, so this is how we nuance it for this individual. But I just worry that in busy practice, it's like, this is what we do. This is how we do it. Here's the answer. And that feels like pseudo science, pseudo theory, if you like. It's not the real theory. It's a watered down kind of version of the theory.
It doesn't make sense. 100%, because it doesn't work without the critical thinking, does it? The critical thinking has to be there. And that's what we teach. And it needs to be embedded. It needs to be embedded in because otherwise you just return to that state that Popper found himself in and needed to kind of write some theories to kind of get himself out of it, of dogmatic thinking. So he might be, for example, George and I did a lot of teaching and practice in regarding something called solution focused therapy, and it would be easy to be quite dogmatic and kind of make everything fit solution focused therapy because we were quite passionate about it, still are, I suppose. But both will recognise, and we'll recognise this and we're teaching as well, is that it's a tool to use, and it's not something we can be dogmatic about because sometimes it won't fit, and sometimes we need to use something else, and it's our critical thinking skills to find out why we should use something at certain different times rather than being so fixed in our approach to something.
Yeah. I think I'm going to make a stretch here. I think one defense of social work theories could be a bit like this. I think this might be Ricky Gervais might have stole this point from someone else, but I remember who he basically makes the point. If all the religious books disappeared and all the science books disappeared and like humans started again or whatever, and they had to rewrite them up, Einstein's theory would still be E = mc squared. It would just somebody else apart from Einstein. The Bible wouldn't be around, the Rig Veda, blah, 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 they wouldn't be around, would they? With social work theories, some of them are so not obvious isn't the word, but like systems. So a person lives in a system, the ecological, where how things, that's fairly, what's the word? It's inarguable, isn't it? That's a one perspective on looking on someone's situation. So I feel strongly that has to be met out by academia, has to be met out by thought, doesn't it? So I think that would exist again.
I think
so it's universal, isn't it? It's universal.
Yeah, it's universal. So maybe there's something in that. It's the skillful observation of the universal as applied to the individual in difficult circumstances is what social work theory and how best to support them out of it. It's just this defense of the pseudoscience, because I think he is coming for us in a sense, because prove your theory's wrong or prove your theory's right. Well, you can you really? There's no evidence. You can't boil a kettle at 110 degrees. It's not that type of test, is it? But that's sort of what he means, Jamie. It is really.
I don't think it is. I think what he's saying, and this is what I've taken from it. I've read a number of his books, which were very difficult to read, I must add. Was that you need to apply your critical thinking. So not approach something in a dogmatic fashion. So I think that's what he means by when he's talking about the pseudosciences, is that you can't put all your weight in it because it's not mathematically calculable like science can be, and there's an area of subjectivity towards it. So you can't be dogmatic in the approach, and I think that's the key, isn't it? Is you've got dogma and you've got criticality. And I think that's where he seems. So the pseudoscience should be sitting with the criticality here, and not with a dogmatic approach. Thinking, I've done a study with 17 different people, and they all did this. So therefore, the theory is sound. It's not. You could do it with 1 million people. The theory still won't be sound. But it's applying your critical thought. Thing. I've done with 1 million people. It's likely to be. It's going to work with this. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. But I'm willing to accept it may not work. If it doesn't work, it's not because there's something wrong with the theory. It's because that's a situation. So what I get from Karl Popper is that them dangerous alarms of dogmatic thinking is dangerous, and critical thinking is what we need to be doing. So I don't think Karl Popper for 1 minute is dismissing all of Freud's work or all any theorists' work, what he calls pseudoscience work. He's accepting for what they are, and not treating them. And not treating because Freud said something, not treating that in the same way as when Einstein said something. Because Einstein looks to disprove his theory. Freud's not looking to disprove his theory. And he says, if we come up with a theory, we should look to disprove it, is what you were saying. So I don't think you were saying that we need scientific approaches wholly in the same way as mathematical ones or physics ones. We just need to have look for evidence-based practice, but apply criticality to it rather than dogmatic views to it.
That's brilliant. Do we want to? That was a brilliant summary. Do we want to offer some kind of final thought, George, before we tie up Popper, literally or metaphorically, whichever you want?
No, I just like that idea of aggressively being willing to weigh up constant sort of reevaluation, or you just backslide to an old position all the time. There's always new information out there. It's how you want to pursue it, really. I mean, it could be wrong. You've got to hold that. You could be wrong. And the smartest thing people need to say more of, I don't know enough about this to hold an opinion yet. The number of times as social workers we jump to an opinion, and I think you probably need to acknowledge that, but it's okay to say I have not formed an opinion yet. How many times have been sat around a table with other colleagues and I've never heard it? But really, that's probably the thing we should be saying more of.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm gonna go with slightly reframing some of George's words for earlier. I think I'm just changing one word from what you said, but I think in this sentence, George completely and utterly defined social work. I thought it was an amazing moment that I quickly scribbled down what he said, and I think I've only changed one word, and that it's the skillful exploration of the universal applied to the individual. And that was one of their moments where I thought, wow, that's pretty cool.
You've got to give the kudos to Jamie on this one, or he'll switch off his camera.
I know. Well, maybe I can edit it in some way so it sounds like Jamie's saying it. But it was you that said it.
What do you say? I'll say it now and you can put it in.
I just thought that was brilliant. I mean, sometimes you listen to somebody talk, don't you? And they say something and you go, that's a That's a defining moment. That's going to appear on one of my slides, one of my lectures tomorrow. Definitely. After this, I'm going into my lectures for tomorrow and I'm putting that in on a slide.
Would you come and knock on us upstairs? I'll come down.
Oh, of course. Yes, you will be in. That's right. So I'm going to do that. And of course, I'll be the first.
They don't listen in that room either. They don't bother.
And I might even try and claim it as my own, plagiarise it. Or any of that. No, I won't do that. No, that would be cruel and awful.
I'm in quite a fortunate position because anything George does that's well, I can take credit for because I taught him.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good.
Well done, George. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.